Okay, welcome back dear friends. I am Dr. Kalim Raza. Today in this video lecture we are going to discuss about the sinuses of the brain. We have discussed the circle of Willis, that how your oxygenated blood is transported to your meninges and to your inner structure of the brain. But now this is the time to take this blood from these sinuses with the help of the Cavernous sinus, which is the largest sinus, with the help of the cerebral veins, and then meningeal veins or the meningeal sinuses, back to your internal jugular vein and then to the right side of the heart. So this structure might confuse you. Let me draw first. So you will draw with me, and then second part of this video lecture is more important. Why? We are going to discuss about the Cavernous sinus, its relation to the pituitary gland, and everything related to the Cavernous sinus. This is 5-star. So this lecture is 5-star lecture. Stay with me please. So first we are going to discuss draw, and then we will discuss about these structures as well. So suppose in a sagittal view we are going to draw the sinuses of the brain. Sinuses of brain. So there will be one superior sagittal sinus. This is your superior sagittal sinus. So blood, deoxygenated blood is flowing backward and then downward. Superior sagittal sinus. And then you have got inferior sagittal sinus. So let me write also. Number 1, this is your superior sagittal sinus, because this is a sagittal view. Okay, number 1. Number 2, this is inferior sagittal sinus, and both these sinus will take blood backward and then backward and downward, and they are meeting here with the help of this number 3, and this number 3 is your straight sinus. Straight sinus. Straight sinus. And this point here is very important, and this is called as confluence of sinus. That the point where all these sinuses will meet, that is called as confluence. So this is the confluence of sinuses, and from lower part, from this posterior part of the brain, occipital sinus number 4. Occipital sinus. Occipital sinus will carry this deoxygenated blood upward and also meeting here at the confluence of sinus. So this point is the confluence. Confluence where all these sinuses, confluence of sinuses, or these sinuses are going to meet each other. Confluence of sinus. So now we have carried all deoxygenated blood with the help of these sagittal sinuses, straight sinus and occipital sinus here. Now how you are going to transport this blood out of the skull, cranial cavity? This is important. Next, from confluence of sinus, this blood will flow through this transverse sinus. So suppose this number 5. This number 5 is your transverse sinus. Transverse sinus. And transverse sinus then continues as sigmoid sinus. Sigmoid sinus. So number 6 is the sigmoid sinus. Sigmoid sinus. Sigmoid sinus. Okay. And with the help of cavernous sinus, with the help of the cavernous sinus, cavernous sinus is the largest sinus of the brain, and cavernous sinus will receive blood from your eyeball with the help of the ophthalmic vein. It's also receiving blood from the cerebral veins and then through meningeal veins. So it's receiving deoxygenated blood from eyeball, from brain also, and from meninges also, and then it's draining the blood. So through the petrosal sinuses. So cavernous sinus, later I am going to draw cavernous sinus in detail, that what are the receiving channels and what are the basically leaving channels from the cavernous sinus. So blood from the cavernous sinus will be taken out from with the help of the two petrosal sinuses. One is the superior petrosal sinus. So number 7, the superior petrosal sinus. Superior petrosal sinus is going to drain in transverse sinus. Remember here, this is your number 7, superior petrosal sinus. Why this is called as petrosal sinus? Because it's present alongside the petrous part of the temporal bone. Later I will show you the structures also. And then number 8, there will be inferior petrosal sinus. A superior and inferior petrosal sinus, they are carrying the blood from cavernous sinus, and inferior petrosal sinus will meet to your sigmoid sinus, and this sigmoid sinus. Now look, both inferior petrosal sinus and sigmoid sinus, let me highlight here, inferior petrosal sinus plus sigmoid sinus, now they continues as internal jugular vein. So internal jugular vein is made up of sigmoid sinus and inferior petrosal sinus. Very important MCQ. So this is now internal jugular vein here, and internal jugular vein, you have got two-sided internal jugular vein, then you have got external jugular veins also. So this internal jugular vein is leaving the skull with the help of jugular foramen, with the help of jugular foramen. So here we have got the jugular foramen, opening of the posterior cranial fossa. Yes, you remember about this opening, that through the jugular foramen there is glossopharyngeal nerve also, vagus nerve also, and then this sigmoid sinus and inferior petrosal sinus exit the jugular foramen, and now it continues as internal jugular vein. So this is your jugular foramen, jugular foramen. So I hope you understood this basic concept, and now we are moving forward, and now you will understand the structure. Okay, let me show you the structure now. You have to draw all these sinuses, this basic structure, to have your concept crystal clear. Okay, look, this is the structure. Superior sagittal sinus is here. We have got inferior sagittal sinus, continuous straight sinus. Your straight sinus is here. This is the confluence point where all sinuses meet. From posterior side you have got occipital sinus, and then this is your transverse sinus. This one is your transverse sinus, and transverse sinus I have told you continues as sigmoid sinus. Here you can see this is your sigmoid sinus, and in sigmoid sinus we have got inferior, this is your inferior petrosal sinus through the cavernous sinus, and then superior petrosal sinus drain into transverse sinus, and then sigmoid sinus plus inferior petrosal sinus continues as internal jugular vein, internal jugular vein. So remember please, this is very important relation. if you will not draw this structure, you will never be able to understand the concept. And most important here is the cavernous sinus, and which sinuses will take blood from the cavernous sinus. There are two: superior petrosal sinus and inferior petrosal sinus. Very important for exam point of view, that superior petrosal sinus drain into transverse sinus, inferior petrosal sinus drain into sigmoid sinus. Jugular vein, internal jugular vein is made up of sigmoid sinus and inferior petrosal sinus. This is high yield content that you have to understand at any cost. Now please move forward, and we are going to discuss about the cavernous sinus. I will draw the cavernous sinus, otherwise you will not understand the anatomy of the cavernous sinus. It's also very important. So you remember that I am now taking back to your first. So why I am showing you this structure, the base of skull, we have discussed in first semester. Look, this is your basically the jugular foramen. Just we have discussed that basically this is a site of the internal jugular vein, the vagus nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve, and other important thing is that this is a petrous part of temporal bone. This is a petrous part of temporal bone. So that's why whenever the sinuses which are going to take blood from the cavernous sinus passing through this petrous part are called as the petrosal sinuses. So most important, this is the middle craniofossa, and this you can see sphenoid bone. I remember that many times I have told you to draw the sphenoid bone because it's occupying your pituitary gland here in sella turcica, and either side of the pituitary gland here you have got the cavernous sinus, the largest sinus of the brain. So these are the petrosal sinuses. These are the petrosal sinuses which are taking blood from cavernous sinus, and they are entering to jugular foramen by meeting with the sigmoid sinus and continues as internal jugular vein. So we have to draw the cavernous sinus, its relation. This is very important. So please focus on this structure also, that this is basically sella turcica that occupy your basically the pituitary gland, and base you have got foramen lacerum. So we are going to discuss everything about the cavernous sinus. So I will draw, and you also have to draw this structure. So please let's draw the cavernous sinus. This is the largest sinus of the brain that take blood from the eyeball through ophthalmic vein, and then from cerebral vein also, and then from the meninges. So cavernous sinus. So in floor you have got foramen lacerum. So floor of the cavernous sinus. So write please. In floor you have got foramen lacerum. Which foramen is there? Foramen lacerum. So this is foramen lacerum. And we know that foramen lacerum, which structure pass through foramen lacerum? Let's recall, let's refresh your first semester knowledge, the internal carotid artery. And today you will understand the significance of internal carotid artery, that how it's passing through the cavernous sinus. And then what is on the medial side? So this will be inside the medial side, this will be the lateral side. So in medial side you have got here is your sella turcica, and here you have got sphenoidal air sinuses, and above you have got the pituitary gland. the master gland of your body. This is the pituitary gland here. So in medial side, right please, the floor you have got the foramen lacerum, on medial side, very important relations. Medial side you have got sella turcica, which is part of your sphenoid bone. You have got pituitary gland, and then you have got sphenoidal air sinuses. And what is present on the roof? On the roof you have got this internal carotid artery, and then also you have got optic chiasma. This is your optic chiasma. Okay, let me draw again please. The internal carotid artery, on the roof is the internal carotid artery, and then you have got the optic chiasma. So this is your optic chiasma. So write please roof. On the roof of cavernous sinus you have got internal carotid artery, and then you have got optic chiasma. So remember, internal carotid artery basically leaves your neck and enter into the base of skull through this foramen lacerum, and it's also passing, internal carotid artery passing through the cavernous sinus. Look, it passing through the cavernous sinus. And then it's coming on the roof also. So first it's entered to the skull with the help of the foramen lacerum, then through the cavernous sinus it's now coming to the roof of the cavernous sinus. So this is very important. Most frequently asked question, in your exam from this cavernous sinus, that what are the structures passing inside the cavernous sinus. So one is internal carotid artery, and second structure which pass through this cavernous sinus is your basically the sixth cranial nerve, the abducens nerve. So let me highlight. I will write this in box, special Chinar box. So in Chinar box I am giving you one question, that structure passing inside the cavernous sinus, inside or through the cavernous sinus. Through cavernous sinus you have got internal carotid artery plus sixth cranial nerve, abducens, which supplies the lateral actus, outward movement of the eyeball. Abducens, sixth cranial nerve inside the cavernous sinus. And what is on the medial side? You have got pituitary gland, you have got sella turcica, sphenoidal air sinus. What is on the floor? You have got foramen lacerum. What is on the roof? Internal carotid artery, and then you have got optic chiasma also. This is your optic chiasma here, this one. So this is your optic chiasma. Now what are the structures present on the lateral side of the cavernous sinus? So when we have discussed the base of skull, and I remember that about the sphenoid bone, I know that I have told you that please draw sphenoid bone 2-3 times. Why? Because this bone is very important, occupying your cavernous sinus, pituitary gland, and also having the superior orbital fissure, and all structures which are supplying to your eyeball, the nerves are passing through superior orbital fissure. So on lateral wall you have got superior orbital fissure. So what are the structures passing through superior orbital fissure? We have got third, fourth cranial nerve, and these third, fourth all supply to the eyeball. So write please. And then in sphenoid bone, on the lateral side of the cavernous sinus you have also got foramen spinosum, you have got foramen rotundum. So what are the structures passing through spinosum and rotundum or foramen novale? So this is important to understand the relations. So on the lateral side, okay, write please what are the structures passing on the lateral side. So you have got V1. What is V1? Maxillary nerve, which is branch of the trigeminal nerve. Okay. V1 is the ophthalmic. On the lateral side you have got V1, which is ophthalmic, and ophthalmic nerve is also passing through superior orbital fissure. Trigeminal nerve having 3 branches. First is the ophthalmic, second is the maxillary, third is the mandibular. Mandibular supply to the muscle of the mastication, ophthalmic this eyeball sensation, and maxillary this sensation of the maxillary region. So lateral side you have got V1. What is V1? Ophthalmic nerve. Okay. And then you have got V2. What is V2? V2 is maxillary nerve. And maxillary nerve is passing through foramen rotundum. It's also present on the lateral side of the cavernous sinus. Later I will show you the base of skull also. So V2 maxillary nerve, and then you have got third and fourth cranial nerve. Third is your oculomotor, and fourth is your trochlear nerve. So these are the structures which are present on the lateral side of the cavernous sinus. So here you can write please lateral side of the cavernous sinus. This is your V1, V2, third and fourth cranial nerve. So these structures are very important. The relations are important. You will definitely have at least 1 to 2 questions, and it's clinically important. Why it's important? Because any infection or tumor of this pituitary gland will ultimately compress these structures, and you will have problems. You will have ophthalmoplegia also, decreased sensation in this region where these special nerves are going to supply. So cavernous sinus thrombosis, cavernous sinus infection, and then pituitary tumor ultimately lead to the cavernous sinus syndrome, and ophthalmoplegia, loss of sensation in this maxillary region or this eyeball area. This is important to understand this relation. You have to draw to make your concept crystal clear. So let me take you back to the structures. Okay, here you can see first look, this structure I have drawn the superior sagittal sinus, the inferior sagittal sinus, then straight sinus. This is the confluence point, and from here you have got the occipital sinus, and then it continues the transverse sinus, sigmoid sinus, superior petrosal sinus and inferior petrosal sinus. Inferior I have told you the drain into sigmoid sinus and continues an inter. So here you can see this is the sigmoid sinus, the transverse sinus. This is the transverse sinus, and transverse sinus is meeting with the superior petrosal sinus, then sigmoid sinus is meeting with the inferior petrosal sinus, and it continues as internal jugular vein through the jugular foramen. So this is what we have discussed right now, and I have drawn the cavernous sinus on either side of the pituitary gland, and blood from the cavernous sinus is carried by petrosal sinuses. This is the inferior petrosal sinus, and this is the superior petrosal sinus, because these are lying within the petrous part of the temporal bone. So I hope you understood this concept, and again this base of skull. So this is sphenoid bone, and here was your cavernous sinus. Here you have got pituitary gland, and you have got superior orbital fissure here, and then this is your foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, and this is foramen spinosum. So all these structures are passing through lateral side. Lateral side I have told you, you have got V1, you have got V2, third and fourth canal. V1 is your ophthalmic, V2 is maxillary. Okay, V1 passing through superior orbital fissure, ophthalmic, and then V2 is basically the maxillary, which is passing through foramen rotundum. It's also on the lateral side. Look, this is the lateral side. Okay, and then this is the medial side. This is the medial side. This is the midline. So medial side you have got pituitary gland, sella turcica, sphenoidal air sinuses, and in base I have told you, base of the cavernous sinus you have got these foramen lacerum, carotid artery pass, and it comes out from above of the floor roof of the cavernous sinus, and then from cavernous sinus blood is carried by these patrosal sinuses, and inferior patrosal is going to meet the sigmoid sinus, and then it exit your skull through the jugular vein. So this is very conceptual. So you have to draw all this important information which I have drawn in this video lecture, especially the relation of the cavernous sinuses and superior sagittal sinus, inferior sagittal sinus. And you have to remember that cavernous sinus, this is important clinically as well in case of the infection of the cavernous sinus thrombosis or pituitary gland tumor as well. So in this structure, we have just drawn the structure of the cavernous sinus, its relation with the pituitary gland. So this is also a coronal section. So let me please explain about this structure. This is important. So here you have got sphenoidal air sinuses in sphenoidal bone, and then above I have told you on the medial side of the cavernous sinus you have got the pituitary gland. So all this bluish structure, this one, this is your cavernous sinus on either side of the pituitary gland. This one, this is your cavernous sinus. So here you can see what is passing inside the cavernous sinus: internal carotid artery, abducens nerve, internal carotid artery, abducens nerve, and then internal carotid artery coming from roof. So that's why I have told you that roof of the cavernous sinus is made up of internal carotid artery and optic chiasma. Here is your optic chiasma, and lateral side we have got this third crane of oculomotor trachelate passing through superior orbital fissure, and then you have got V1, which is the first ophthalmic division of trigeminal nerve, also passing through superior orbital fissure, and then you have got maxillary V2 passing through foramen rotundum. So this structure will help you to understand in conceptual way, and don't forget to please draw what I have drawn relating to the cavernous sinus also.